Hello and welcome to my review of the Legiones Astartes Scorpius missile tank for Warhammer the Horus Heresy from Games Workshop. This tank will cost you £37.50 and comprises of 125 plastic components. The structure of this video, I will have a look at this unit up close, look at the detail and that Scorpius missile launcher. We'll go through the spare parts and then some size comparisons and finally the rules. So the first thing I'd like to say is Forge World used to make this tank. It was a hybrid kit with parts of the old Mars pattern plastic Rhino and some of their resin pieces to kind of upgrade it to a Deimos pattern with the side exhausts and the doors and the front and the weapon itself. I think when I last saw it, it was about 50 or maybe even £60 on Forge World's website before they took that down in preparation for its full plastic release. And why wouldn't they release it? They've gone to the trouble of creating a Deimos pattern Rhino in plastic with that awesome vehicle accessory sprue, which we'll look at a bit later on. So it makes sense that they've brought out not only the Rhino, but two different types of Predators, just the Predator tank and the support tank, as well as this Scorpius missile tank. I wouldn't be surprised if they've got a couple more tricks up their sleeve to utilise this plastic Deimos pattern Rhino chassis. Again, the price point is £37.50, meaning it's £1.50 more than the current Space Marine Whirlwind. Now a lot of people were using the Whirlwind tank as a Scorpius. If you were playing against me, absolutely fine. You know, if you've already owned a Whirlwind, other than changing the looks and things and it being a Scorpius, I can't see another reason why you'd spend another £37.50 when you could proxy a Whirlwind. I built this tank in the live stream recently, very enjoyable. I did build it in just about the 3 hours, but I do talk a lot, as everyone knows. So I'd probably say you could build it in between 1 and 2 hours. Let's have a look at the detail of this tank then. Firstly, big mention to the box. Lovely looking box, you know exactly what it is. If we have a look at the reverse as well, you've got the tank itself and its loadout. My only gripe really with this kit is whether they could have squeezed in another sort of variant, a different looking missile weapon on the top there instead of just this one, or even have it as like a command Rhino tank. That might have confused a few people, seeing as normally you can only put one piece of cover art on your front box. The box itself is slightly thinner than a Predator box, and it is actually the same size as a Rhino box. So the detail itself then, I've glued both of the missile kind of firing banks in one position. Unfortunately, you can't just freely move that. If you do, you have to leave it unglued, and it doesn't sit in well enough for you to just leave it. They will fall out. So I've glued it in this position. This whole top area though, if you want another Rhino or want to use this as a Rhino, but keep this front plate, which is different than the Rhino's front plate, I might add, it's a Predator front plate. You can leave this top Scorpius missile launcher attachment plate loose. You don't have to glue it, and then you can just swap it with the Rhino and then you've got a Rhino. That's what I would suggest you do if you don't have too many Rhinos and you want to use this as like a dual unit. This plate and the missile launcher are the new parts of the kit. Everything else we've seen before. You know, we've seen the front plate on the Predator, we've seen the combi bolter on the Rhino, as well as the chassis itself and the exhaust. It's up to you if you want to glue this in place, but I actually like it being loose, and then you can rotate it. I've got a second one, mainly because I've always wanted two, and two go quite well with the Arcus, which is, I'd say, the better missile launcher. tank. That's on a Sakaran chassis. And also you can field 2 in a squadron. You can sit them at the back somewhere. They're relatively cheap points. We'll go through the rules later on, and you can just blast your opponent apart with the 48-inch range. When I was building this in the live stream, I had a couple of spare parts that I took off the sprue that didn't use. One was one of the bolt guns, which you can fit this with 2 pintle mounted bolters if you really wish. I think it's fine with the standard. The main reason you're going to take this tank anyway is for that 48-inch range missile launcher. This is the Rhino front plate, which again you could probably leave that off, but I think it would keep falling off, and you can swap it with that. These are the top hatch for the extra plate. These are the smoke launchers, and I just decided not to put smoke launchers on. I mean, this is a vehicle that you just park at the back. I can't see why you'd want to get it any closer unless you're playing like an apocalypse game or something where you know, you take these from a very long range and you want to pop smoke or something. The other spare parts that you'll get is, of course, this awesome vehicle accessory sprue. You've got loads of options here, different pintle mounted weapons such as the heavy bolter, the heavy flamer, multi-melter. You've got the hunter killer, you've got the Havoc launcher, you've got the different Space Marines, and you've got the different heads for the Space Marine that can pop out and look and use the omniscope and things. You've got the dozer blade, you've got the other Magna and Minor combi bolter options, as well as a searchlight and different hatches to accommodate those different weapons. So excellent vehicle accessory sprue. I've got a number of these now that are spare, which I will be using for some of the 40k vehicles, utilising that pintle mounted multi-melter. It's just great that you get these in these Horus Heresy vehicle kits, because they are extremely useful in modifying your existing resin Horus Heresy tanks, and I'd love to see this sprue bundled in with those kits in the near future. I've always been crying out for a separate sprue with pintle mounted weapons, and now you technically don't need to buy one because they're giving them away, because they're included in all of these Horus Heresy Rhino chassis vehicles. So size comparisons then. Firstly, I'll be comparing the Scorpius to other vehicles, and why don't we just start off big? Right here on the desk, of course, I have a Thunderhawk gunship, as you do. It's been hiding there for quite a while, hiding in plain sight. That's what it will be next to your brand new Thunderhawk gunship that I know that you've just bought yourself or you've received for Christmas. What a beautiful Christmas present to receive. So that's where it measures up next to that, and it's going to look gorgeous with another one of these flanking the other side. I only wish that they could be armed with anti-air missile, but it definitely lends itself to that image of some anti-air missile tanks next to a landed Thunderhawk. Back to similar sized miniatures, and of course next to a Rhino, it's as you'd expect. It's going to be the same size, albeit with that Scorpius turret. Of course next to a Predator, again it's going to be the same size, but just a little difference in the turret loadout, and of course the Predator has these sponsor mounted weapons. But it's so nice to see a collection of Deimos pattern vehicles slowly infiltrating the collection. Let's move on to some slightly larger vehicles then, in the form of a Sakaran. Now unfortunately I do not have the Sakaran Arcus built yet in resin. I'm currently making my way through a Sabre, and I know what you're going to say. Well, super, pull your finger out. A Sabre takes 10 minutes to build, and yes, that's true, but I am creating a lot of content right now. In the live stream, there's a very valid question about the Scorpius missile launcher itself. You know, does it fit on, you know, the Predator tank? If you wanted to, for whatever reason, do that. Yes, it does. You can't take sponsor mounted weapons with it, but it fits there. And likewise, does it fit on a Sakaran? Yes, it does, but bearing in mind the Sakaran's also cannons fit on a Predator and they just make it look silly. This also makes it look silly. This looks like a very small Arcus. The missile launcher does fit. I guess you could proxy it, but it just looks odd. It looks, something's just not right, and I think it just doesn't suit it whatsoever on this big tank. You know, Sakarans are so much more bigger than Predators. I just don't think it fits. Let's carry on with you know, bigger, better tanks and things. So we've got the brand new Proteus Land Raider right here. Don't know why that's a bit wonky, but it is for some reason. So that's where the Land Raider sits. Then we've got the whopping great big Spartan. You can barely fit the Spartan in this size comparison, but it just gives you an idea of just how much bigger the Spartan is. It's absolutely huge. Can't wait to build a few more of them, really. Yeah, there's the Spartan next to the Scorpius. So that just showcases how big the Spartan is. But it's not going to look too bad next to some normal Land Raiders. And then we have the Kratos boy right here. It's, you know, thinner, lower profile than the Sakaran as well, yeah, definitely a longer sort of streamlined tank with that big cannon. And this is probably, the Scorpius is probably a little bit, but the Scorpius is probably a little bit taller depending on the angle that you go for those missiles. And then some sort of standard miniatures, I guess. So we've got the long-ranged Leviathan Dreadnought there, and we've also got a mortis pattern Contemptor, and that's where it sizes up next to those. You know, if you have a few Contemptors, Predators are going to run quite well with it, but it just gives you that sense of how big a Leviathan really is compared to, well, both of those. Space Marine miniatures. We have an Interruptor and a Cataphractii Terminator. They're probably the most useful size comparisons I can make for Horus Heresy. And then finally, let's just give you some 40k miniatures to compare. I haven't got the Whirlwind nearby, but it's going to be similar size to you know, the Predators that we've seen and the Rhino. But that's where he stands next to a normal Space Marine, Sly Marvo, and then a Primaris. Okay, so now we're on to the rules of this Scorpius missile tank. You'll find its rules in the heavy support section of your Legiones Astartes army book. It will cost you 120 points, and its stat line reads as follows. Its movement of 12 inches, ballistic skill 4, front armor is 13, side is 12, rear is 10. It's got 4 hull points. How does that compare to a Predator, which for some reason is closer to the front of the heavy support section? Well, it's a little bit slower than a Predator. Predator is a 14-inch movement, but I will say that the Scorpius tank does have 1 extra hull point. It has 14 hull points instead of the 3, which is very odd. The armour is all the same though, 13, 12 and 10. The war gear, it has a turret-mounted Scorpius missile launcher, a pintle-mounted twin-linked bolter, smoke launchers. So mine does, even though it doesn't. I'm following Games Workshop's aesthetics here. Options: a Legion Scorpius squadron may take up to 1 additional Legion Scorpius for 105 points each. So that's fantastic. You know, you're getting double the Scorpius missile launchers for cheaper. You know, so for 225 points, you're getting 2 missile tanks. Scorpius may take one of the following: pintle-mounted twin-link bolter, combi weapon, havoc launcher, heavy bolter, heavy flamer, and multi-melter. It can also take it can also take 1 hull-mounted hunter-killer missile, dozer blade, and searchlights. So, what does this Scorpius missile launcher actually do? Well, it only has 1 profile. It doesn't have any types of missiles, which is a bit of a shame. I would have liked to have seen it at least carry flak missiles, which the Arcus does. It is, after all, like a mini Arcus missile tank, isn't it? But it's a 48-inch range, strength 8, AP 4, heavy 1, barrage, large blast 5-inch, rocket barrage. So how does that compare to the Arcus? Well, most of the Arcus missile launcher warheads, such as the Arcus, the Pyrax and the Neutron Flux, are all 36-inch range. It's only the anti-air Sky Spear which carry the 48-inch range, which is very surprising. And I would have thought that a bigger missile launcher on a bigger tank would be able to shoot further, but I guess that's not the case. You're getting one large blast with this weapon. You're getting a 5-inch blast. Yes, the armor penetration isn't the best at 4, okay, but the strength is 8. So most of the targets you'll be hitting have probably other tanks which you could use it against. You're most likely going to drop this onto tanks at that strength 8. That could be pretty good against their sort of side and rear armor. You could also be dropping it on units that have toughness 4, and then and they'll still get saves, but if there are some multi-wound miniatures in there, then you're going to kill them outright with that strength 8. Comparing it to the Whirlwind Scorpius in the compendium book though, it seems like it's better in 40k. It's the same range, 48-inch range, but it's a heavy 3D3. So instead of a large template, you can potentially be scoring 9 hits there. It is a lower strength though at 6, but the armor penetration is -2. So that's going to be affecting their saves straight away. And you're getting 2 damage, so potentially 18 damage with this. It is a blast weapon, and it can also target units that are not visible to the bearer. Now, we do have some weapons in Horus Heresy that can target units not visible to the bearer. And this is one such vehicle in the Horus Heresy. I think it's something that some people overlook. And one of the reasons is because there's rules both hidden away in the army list book for Rocket Barrage, and also it's got that extra rule of Barrage, which you find in your Age of Darkness rulebook. Now, the Barrage rule means that these units can indirectly fire at targets with no line of sight, and then this Rocket Barrage special rule means that you're going to get pinning with this vehicle, and also, more importantly, rending on a 4+. So yes, that drops the penetration down considerably, and it means that these tanks can vaporize whole 5-inch blobs of your normal Space Marines, and possibly even Terminators too, if they're out in the open. But that's providing that it didn't move, and so even more of a reason to have a couple of these at the back of your board as a unit, as one unit, just firing away. If they fire 2 5-inch blasts at a unit of 20 Space Marines that are out in the open, chances are they'll have made their points cost up. If they both fire at a tank and completely annihilate it, again, they've made their points cost up. The real weakness of this tank, or if you run them as a pair, is its side and rear armour. Again, all the more reason to keep it quite far back. They're quite survivable with the 4 hull points. You know, they are more survivable than a Predator. It doesn't really matter that they're slower. The fact that they've got the same armour as a Predator but more hull points, and they can fire at, I'd say, further range. It depends what weapons you go for your Predators. But against dedicated anti-armour weaponry such as a 10-man las cannon team, which incidentally is the same range as one of these, you could be up against some trouble. But then again, even a Sakaran, which arguably has shorter range weaponry, would come unstuck against a dedicated anti-tank team. Also, close combat. If you've got Terminators that can rip holes through this, or Dreadnoughts that get in range of this, like a Leviathan that's drop podded next to a couple of these, it can quite easily take them out. but of course that your opponent is paying a premium for, you know, the drop pods and the Leviathan itself. So in summary, it's a fun kit. It's not too pricey. You can proxy it as a Whirlwind or Whirlwind as a Scorpius, vice versa. I'm sure that would be fine with your opponent. It's a high value unit for the points costs. It has a specific function. I just wish that they were given Sky Spear missiles as well, like a different loadout rather than just this one-shot artillery piece weapon. At this point, I do question the viability of Vindicators, although Vindicators do get a bit of a buff from the side armour and they have the same number of hull points. They are the same speed as this tank, but their Demolisher cannon is just that 24-inch range and a small 3-incher of a blast marker. And for the same points cost, you can be launching shots from across the board and in relative safety. You're most likely going to be going up against an opponent that has at least a 5-man las cannon heavy support squad, and at least picking this over a Demolisher kind of almost guarantees that you can fire at most things on the board, whereas the Demolisher has to get in range. And you might find out that it won't even make it to get that range before it gets taken out, because it will be a high value target with that strength 12 cannon on the front. What do you guys think of the Scorpius missile tank? For me, it was a must buy. I've always wanted one and I've held back from getting it in resin from a combi kit, from resin and plastic from Forge World. I'm so glad I've waited. My collection of missile tanks is pretty much complete with these two and the Arcus. Please do put your thoughts and opinions down in the comments below. It'd be great to hear from you. Thank you ever so much for joining me today. Thank you for watching. The Emperor Protects.